Hey everyone, I'm Jack Fossett, and I'm very excited to share with you two awesome classic vintage pedals that I have had lent to me, and I'm doing a fun video with these. I have an original Marshall Bluesbreaker and an Ibanez Tube Screamer Classic TS10. We're going to play through these with a couple of different guitars, talk a little bit about the unique connection that these two pedals have. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you enjoy. Alright, so you have just heard the original Marshall Bluesbreaker, and next we're going to get to the Ibanez, the Tube Screamer Classic TS10. Before we dive in, I want to say thank you to Jeremy from Maine Guitars who lent me these pedals. In lent, how appropriate is that? This is not a sponsored video by him, he just lent them to me. There's no money changing hands or anything, I just get to bring you this kind of cool video, so I am going to put a link down below to where these two are for sale. You can buy these from Maine Guitars if you want. This one is the original Marshall Bluesbreaker that you've just heard. Now, these were from a pedal line that Marshall put out in the early 90s that never really took off. They didn't get that popular. This one has become a legend since then, and it has been one of the kind of pinnacle circuits as far as the birth of the what we now see them as the boutique pedals. The Bluesbreaker is one that many boutique pedal builders, I don't even know if that's still a term, it certainly was a term like 10, 15 years ago, but smaller companies and everything, the Bluesbreaker circuit has been at least a starting point for a lot of some of the heavy hitters in that kind of scene. Now, it originally came out, the idea was to capture the sound of the vintage Marshall, and this is another thing that's unique about this one, where it's a really cool mid-gain overdrive that works great as a boost. As an owner of a JTM 45 Bluesbreaker, I don't think it sounds like the Bluesbreaker amp. It sounds like a cool overdrive pedal. And I think one of the things that in a modern, you have to look at in the context of the time. In the early 90s when this came out, and of course in the 90s, I mean, you're talking like high gain city. You're coming off of the hair bands of the 80s, you're getting into grunge and things like that. There's just a lot of distortion at that, kind of time. This would have sounded, it would have evoked more of that classic Marshall sound then. Nowadays, when you think about capturing an amp tone with all the crazy technology there is, you think about modeling software. So, important point on this one, it's not a modeling pedal. You don't plug it in and all of a sudden your rig sounds like a Marshall. That's not the point of this, like it would be with a Line 6 Helix or a Fractal or something like that. This is just a cool overdrive that kind of evokes that classic tone. The Tube Screamer TS10, the funny thing about this one is it's just a tube screamer in the long line of tube screamers. And that brings up to the point of what connects these two pedals. Many of you probably know this. Many of you have probably commented this already. But what really connects these two is their resurgence in popularity due to John Mayer. And if you watch the old Premier Guitar rig rundown video from about 10 years ago, like 10 or 11 years ago, his guitar tech, Rene Martinez, is showing the pedal rig, which came out on these, he had them, they're all on and going through a fancy switcher, and they were pulling out on these trays. And one of them had an Ibanez TS10 Classic, and one of them had a Marshall Bluesbreaker. Now, the Bluesbreaker, more so than the TS10, really got a huge boost in its resurgence due to Mayer using it. And then again, also in conjunction with these boutique pedal builders kind of using it as a starting point for some really cool pedals, including things like the Prince of Tone. Snouse does a whole bunch of stuff with them, and then there's a whole bunch of other ones. But this was very much a kind of forgotten bargain bin pedal for a long time, and it really goes to show how our influences really dramatically affect the guitar market. Now, the TS10, I would also say that he probably had the strongest influence on this one. However, this one was also used in the later years, I believe, by Stevie Ray Vaughan, and it was used by a number of others. This was an Ibanez production pedal. The interesting thing about it is it's actually kind of, with the plastic switch and everything, was actually going down the slightly cheaper road later on from the original 808s and 9s, but it does have a unique tone that a lot of players like. It's a little bit different. I find it sounds slightly even. The gain is a little bit more even and a little bit more rounded off at the edges. It doesn't quite have the same bite that the TS9 does, and doesn't have quite the same smoothness that the 808 does. It still works, does all the Tube Screamer things you want it to do. In fact, somebody posted recently a funny meme that said, here's the difference between all the Tube Screamers, and they showed a screenshot of all of Tom Brady's team pictures from 2001 up until now. So, a Tube Screamer is a Tube Screamer. There are certainly variations in the circuit, variations in the chips, and the other things that are going on in there that I'm not a tech person, so I'm not going to get into that too much. But a Tube Screamer is a Tube Screamer. Tube Screamers do what Tube Screamers do, and they do it well. And I've never played one that I really didn't like. This one does have a unique voice. It's a little bit more different from the 808 and the 9 than they are from each other. But this is another one that it's just really unique that these two pedals, which could have easily been just forgotten ones, that when somebody like John Mayer uses them, that now they fetch top dollar when people are selling used iterations of them. Even the Bluesbreaker 2, which I used for years, which is really not the same circuit as this one. It's still kind of a lower gain overdrive, and it's a cool pedal, the little Tone Bug one. I wish I had kept mine because I got it for $35, and those are really, really unique and cool pedals in and of their own right. And again, I mentioned that with the TS10 because, you know, even while Stevie Ray Vaughan may have used one, I haven't seen any evidence that he officially used one, but if anyone has that to share, please feel free to share it. I believe it's pretty well accepted that he used a TS10 in the later years. If you think of the Stevie Ray Vaughan Tube Screamer, the TS10 is probably not the one you're going to think of. I really think it's that used by John Mayer that has revitalized this particular circuit. Now, because these two pedals are kind of uniquely linked by John Mayer, that's why I'm using the guitars and the amp rig that I'm using in this video. So I'm using a Fender Stratocaster and I'm using a PRS CE24 semi-hollow. Stratocaster, obviously he used a Stratocaster for years and now he's with PRS, and while this one is a dual humbucking PRS and his Silver Sky is more akin to a Stratocaster layout, he also has used other PRS guitars and things like the Super Eagle. So I'm using that for my humbucking tones, I'm using the Stratocaster for my single coil tones, and to round that all out, I'm going into my VHT D-Fifty, which is an amplifier inspired by the famous D-style amplifiers. Now this one has a little bit more of a kind of an English glassiness to it, so it's not like a straight up kind of D grumble sound. But it really gets a really cool, that kind of soft, sultry, bluesy tone. So we've just put the Bluesbreaker through its paces. Now we're going to play the TS10 with both of those guitars. Again, big thank you to Jeremy from Maine Guitars for lending me these so that I can bring you all this video. He's also lent me an original Boss overdrive, which I'm going to use in a different video. Follow the link below if you're interested in purchasing either of these pedals. Please don't, because I want to get them someday myself, because I don't get to keep them, which is... oh, I'd love to keep these pedals. I'm Jack Fossett. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Stick around for some tones from the TS10, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video.